our client bought it, wanted it to turn it back into a single dwelling. We've also had clients that would look to subdivide it. Typical story that I'm sure many of us have been involved with. And from a planning perspective, very simple. Planners love this kind of thing. Apart from one small aspect which I'll touch on, like I say, very simple. Plugging in a few bathrooms, give it a coat of paint, and the client can move in. So the planning change of use application went in, turned around in double quick time. But what a lot of people fail to appreciate is that under the building standards, you also need a change of use application, not just on the planning side, but on the building regs as well. And the trouble with that is when you have a change of use application from a building standards perspective, the default position is that this should be treated as a completely new building and will be assessed as such. So in this case, it's not on the picture, but the 4 steps at the front, you need a level ramped access. It needs to be insulated to current standards. Single glazed windows, how are you going to do that? There's low level windows. You can't have that. Where's your fall protection? You need a kitchen, a bedroom, and a downstairs bathroom with your activity spaces. How are you going to deal with that? And fire issues, fire upgrading of the ceiling, the staircase, all these things which are by no means insurmountable. They are, and we can deal with that. But a lot of clients and maybe some new developers fail to appreciate that that needs to be built into budgets, needs to be built into timescales. It's not just as simple as, like I say, putting in some bathrooms, putting a coat of paint on, and moving in. So what can and can't you do to a listed building when there's clearly obvious things, such as not ripping out decorative cornices and original timberwork and things like that. But there's also things that I found which are maybe not as obvious and actually quite a grey area and full of subjective thinking. So this again is Athol Crescent, and what our client wanted to do was, this is the ground floor, they wanted to put a kitchen in here, which on the face of it seemed fine. They weren't taking down any walls. Yes, the room was nice, but nothing too special. The planner, the building officer, wasn't happy with that. He was going to refuse, this was part of the change of use application, he was going to refuse it on the grounds that the kitchen was going in there. So I met with him a few times and tried to argue it, and his point of principle was that a kitchen shouldn't go in a principal room. He classed this, on the ground floor, principal room. His whole basis of the argument was kitchen can't go into a principal room. I argued that in this day and age, actually a kitchen is the principal room. It's where people spend their time. But he was going to refuse it. So the clients, they were in a hurry, and they didn't really want to fight on this one. So we ended up putting it down in the basement here, which on reflection it turned out quite well for the client, because in the basement we were able to take down walls, put some patio doors out the back, and things like that. Another thing that we face, a number of clients have come to us, the same kind of property, and they want to open up this wall here between the ground and between the front and the back on the ground floor. Again, it's just something that to lay clients or developers think, what's wrong with that? There's some doors in. But again, the planners really strongly resist that, say that you can't see from the front to the back of the building. There's things like that clients come to a project and think, I want to do that, but it is resisted. And a general rule of thumb, again, many of you will know this, but in a basement, these kind of properties, you can do a lot. They're generally in a pretty bad state, so you can knock them about, take walls down, pretty big openings. Ground and first floor, can't really do much to leave them as they are. And then you've got a bit more scope on the second and third floors. Up in the attics, which leads me on to potential contentious issue of roofs. And I've been having lots of issues lately with dormers and roof lights and things like that. And new dormers on a listed building, strongly resisted by the council, and I'm even finding that dormers on non-listed buildings, whether conservation area or not, they're just, the local authority seem to have an issue with altering the roof line, and even actually a roof line. So this is a tenement, typical tenement in Marchmont, where a client of ours has bought a top floor, which also comes with the attic, and they wanted to subdivide it and create some space up in the attic. And the planner didn't have any problem with the subdivision, that was all fine. But it was the roof lights. So this is an aerial view of it, and as you can see, it transpired, even though you can't see it from the street level, you actually can't see it really from the building opposite. But there's no other roof lights on that block, and so the council were going to refuse, or they have refused, this application. We're going to put, I'm not sure what block it is, but say it's this block, 3 roof lights in that, conservation roof lights. You can hardly see it, going to get a refusal, maybe some scope to put some on the back. But again, going into a project, we need to be aware that even what may be little things like roof lights can be contentious, and that has really much scuppered that project for the client. They bought that thinking that they could quite easily convert that attic, but without roof lights, they're scuppered. Now what are they going to do with that building that they bought? They're scratching their heads. Valleys as well is another hot topic. So this was a project, or it wasn't a project actually, it didn't go anywhere, but a building in the Trinity area. It wasn't listed, but it was a conservation area. And again, they wanted, the attic was partially converted, but they wanted to create a bit more space, so the proposal was to infill the valley here, lead roof, bit of a pitch there. You can imagine there'll be a staircase in under there and rooms off. So what we thought was a neat, tidy solution. And this is the valley here. The only thing that would look onto it was these 2 roof lights here, which I think were even bathrooms or something like that. So we went to the planners as the application consultation, and the fact that they refused to even contemplate this, I argued that no one can see it really. That wasn't the point. You can see it from a plane, and it affected the character of the building. And so again, you know, imagine someone buying that building thinking, we could do that, and then getting refused. Now again, you know, we could have tried to fight that one, but the client didn't really have the appetite for that at all. But having said all that, it's not all doom and gloom. This is a project of ours, Nunmore Tower, out near East Lothian, and the client came to us. It was a former, or used by some monks as a monastery. Our client wants to turn it back into a very fine residence. And they came to us and said, well, it's clearly listed, obviously, they want to put a lift in here. And various other alterations, and chatted it through and said, yeah, it all sounds doable, but I think we may find the lift a real sticking point. That was going to be a real contentious thing, but I think we were happy to pursue it. So with a lot of careful analysis, a colleague of mine, Neil, spent 6 weeks going into the history of this building and looking at the development of it, and we put together a very robust case, not only for the internal alterations, but the staircase as well, or the lift. You know, it seemed an obvious place to put a vertical element. This was one of the newest parts of the building, and we submitted the application, and 8 weeks later it got consent. No questions. We met with the planning officer. So it does show that if you're willing to spend the time and the effort putting a very thorough case together, and you believe in what you're doing, you can get what you want. Neighbours. So this, not TV program, this is a street in York called the Shambles. So you can see, you need to get on with your neighbours if you live in there. what can neighbours say? What can they object to if you're planning to do something? And again, really, there's two key things. They can object about loss of daylight, even if the building is, or the window is north facing, not directly facing the sun, they can still object about daylight, and loss of privacy, so window to window. My view is even before you start a project, even before you contemplate something, you can work out quite hard and fast rules, overshadowing and loss of daylight, loss of privacy, so you can work these things out before you take on board a building, take on board a project, and you can have that forewarning. The other thing that's important to remember is neighbours or anyone, to be honest, they can only object on specific grounds that are relevant to the application. So the one that I mentioned about in Marchmont, the subdivision, one of the flats they were creating was 5-bedroom. And we put the application in, it had 40 objections. And the neighbours were all worried that this was going to be let out for HMO, noisy students, all that kind of thing. But all the objections, there must have been at least 20 that were HMO based, they were all discarded because this wasn't an HMO application, so the planning officer couldn't take them as a relevant objection. There were also a number of objections over the ownership of the attic, and again they were discarded because that wasn't a planning issue. So it's worth just knowing and remembering that any objection has to be on a relevant ground. So that's important to know if you're objecting to something. And also it's important if we've had a few projects where we have encouraged the owner to get letters of recommendation as a way of putting it through. Again, those letters need to be on a relevant subject. It can't just be, I like this project, I think it should be given consent, but they discard it, don't count it. It's important to get the wording right. Another thing that maybe some new developers get a bit of surprise on is a lot of planning applications for new housing or say converting a building into flats can sometimes be subject to a financial contribution to the public services. So this is actually, we've got a project in Wales, southwest Wales, of all places, converting a Victorian school into 6 dwellings. And as part of a pre-application inquiry, we sent on a scheme and it came back, and it transpires that for every dwelling that's created, the developer will have to pay £6,500 education, £187 for the library, £948 for recreation, £2.5 for transportation, and that's over £10,000 per unit that the developer will have to pay. That basically comes off the bottom line, or you have to transfer it to your purchaser. And again, these things can be found out way before you take the building on, before you even buy the place. You can find out this information, and it's all important stuff as you build your project plan, your budget, things like that. Services is another important thing that you need to research, and information can be found. So the Steading conversion that we did down in the Borders about 8 years ago now, I think it carried A-listed Steading, converted it into 6 or 7 dwellings. There's another one that we looked at exactly the same time that isn't converted yet. We got planning permission and a building warrant for it. It's passed through the hands now of 3 different developers, and none of them can get it to work. And one of the biggest reasons is, whilst there is water into the property, if you were to run 2 taps, it would trickle out. And the main water supply is 2 miles away down this road. That could easily be found out before you go and buy a property. And the same with electricity. It might have power coming into it, but does it have the capacity? Even in and around town, when we've done subdivisions of flats or properties, there's obviously electricity there. It transpires that there's not enough capacity to subdivide it, and then you need to get a utility company in to that's more money, and the new ones dealt with utility companies will know that they're a law unto themselves and can take 6-9 months to deliver what you want them to deliver. I just want to touch slightly on style. This is Sainsbury wing to the National Gallery in London, which around about when I was at university, it was built and widely criticised as a pastiche copy of the main gallery. And there's a lot of clients come to us with this assumption that any extension, addition to an existing building, particularly an important listed one, needs to be a copy, needs to blend in, make it look as though it's always been there. But whilst that is something that can be done, and we have done that with clients, and it's certainly not dismissed by the planners, they actually prefer a more contemporary approach, a more contemporary addition, so that it's distinct. Yes, it's sympathetic, it's complementary, but it's of its time. And again, it's just something that I find that clients, developers could be a bit more aware of, that you don't just have to copy. I just want to spend the final part just looking at a couple of case studies. You may be thinking that, particularly on the statutory consent side with planners, that it is all a bit doom and gloom, and that you have to bow down and do whatever they say. It's not always the case, and we find there have been cases where we believe in the proposal and we have the backing and support of the client, then we will fight for the proposal and we'll take the planners on. So just a couple of quick case studies. This is in Colinton, this house here on the right. It hadn't been touched since probably the 50s. And it was quite unusual because from the street, the way you looked at it, that was almost looked like the back of the house.